And as we continue these commandments, I just want to continue to emphasize and remind you of the beauty of the commandments. God didn't give us these commandments so that our lives would be miserable as Christians. You know, sort of like, oh, we can't have any fun because he's told us, thou shalt not do this and thou shalt not do that. That wasn't the case. When God gave us the commandments, he gave them to us so that we could truly experience the fullness of what life should be around us. And if we abide and we really strive to live out these commandments, although we will never be able to live them out perfectly, but if we strive to really live these commandments out, it'll make our lives much better. And not only will it make our lives much better, but it'll continue to grow and increase the love sort of relationship that we have with God. It will grow us in our walk with him. And the beauty of the commandments is summed up in the two different areas where, first of all, it's about a love for God, and secondly, it's a love for our neighbor. And so as we work toward these commandments, we love God more, we love our neighbor more, and that's a good thing. Now, I don't know, I'm curious, how many of you, when you were smaller, maybe heard this phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me? How many of you have ever heard that? Quite a few of you have. Maybe some of the younger ones, not as much. You know, I remember as a little kid, that was a phrase that, I had heard. I don't know if my mom, was trying to teach me that, especially when maybe other kids were calling me names or something like that. And I maybe remember a time or two, and of course my brother and sisterly battles with each other, where maybe my sister said something to me that I didn't appreciate, and, well, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Like, you're not going to faze me on this. But I think the reality of it is as we get older and we really think about that phrase, we're reminded that, of course, sticks and stones most definitely can break our bones, but words really can hurt. And what we speak, what we say, can ultimately make a huge difference in the lives of the people that are around us. And we are living in a world today where it's becoming harder and harder to really discern what is truth versus what is a lie, and what words are building up and what words are tearing down. In our media today, especially when it comes to our president, there's always something on a given day that is either condemning him or it's trying to build him up. And on any given day, one of those is probably a lie and the other one's a truth. And we have a hard time discerning the truth from the lies. And we're living in a world today anymore where we're getting so many things thrown at us that it's hard for us to know what is right and what is wrong, what is truth and what is a lie. And so as we talk about this aspect of bearing false witness, as we look at this commandment, Exodus 20:16, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. Or the King James Version puts it, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. What we discover is that a lot of times words can be cheap. But the call upon our lives is sort of maybe like you hear when you're in a court. The call upon our lives is to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That we shouldn't lie. That lies should not be coming out of our mouths. And I think sometimes that's incredibly hard for us. We live in a world where words can be very cheap. But yet God is ultimately telling us in this commandment, we must not tamper with the truth. And God takes that pretty seriously. If you look throughout the scriptures, you will find a lot of scriptures that talk about lying and how we shouldn't lie, and talking about truth and how we need to speak the truth. Let me just give you some examples about the lying aspect. In Psalm 12:2, it says, everyone lies to his neighbor. Their flattering lips speak with deception in their hearts. In Proverbs 6:16 through 19, it talks about there are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him. Now, we're not going to read all 7, but 2 of those are a lying tongue and a false witness who pours out lies. And then we can look at Proverbs 12:22, and again, we hear the Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. Or we go to Proverbs 14:5. An honest witness does not deceive, but a false witness pours out lies. Or we go to Ephesians 4:25, and it says, there each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. And in Colossians 3, verse 9, do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices. And in Revelation 21:8, it says, but the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexual immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars will be consigned to the fiery lake of the burning sulfur. This is the second death. And so we read within these verses that to God, truth matters. That when we speak, when we talk, the truth should be flowing off of our lips. Now, the reality of it is sometimes it's hard to do. And when we look at this commandment, we see that God just really hates, God despises the fact that when we speak, sometimes we don't speak that truth. And so, as you look at this commandment, maybe just some ways in which maybe we are breaking this commandment as we speak. The first one, very simply, would be lying under oath. Okay, you think about in a court case, in a court, you go to the witness stand and you stand there and they put a Bible and say, place your hand on the Bible. And what do they say? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And usually the response is yes. And then, you know, there are a lot of times when people will be on that stand and they're not telling the truth, they're actually lying about something. Just this past week on the news, I heard of a young man who was 18 or 19 years old and was convicted of sexual assault on a woman. This past week, he had spent 6 years in prison. And this past week, this young lady finally came forward and told the truth and said it never happened. She lied under oath. And because of that, an innocent man paid a penalty for 6 years for something that he never did. And so sometimes there's that mindset of you know, we're trying to hurt someone else for whatever reason, but we lie under oath. The Jewish tradition, the Jewish laws in Jesus' day were very strict on this. In the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy, there's some passages that talk about the penalty for someone not telling the truth under oath. In fact, I thought it was interesting because I wonder what it'd be like today if that was the case. And what the penalty was whatever someone was accusing someone else of, if it turned out that they were lying, they would have to pay the penalty or the price themselves because they were lying. So in other words, if it was stealing, and let's say the penalty for stealing was 2 years in prison, and it turned out that the person that was accusing someone else of stealing ultimately was lying, that person that accused them of stealing would have to spend the next 2 years in prison. That's how much the Jewish law in Jesus' day said your word has to be a very important thing. And if you're going to speak, you should speak the truth. Now, the second one is maybe this, and that is the direct lie. And I think all of us would be able to say, okay, I know what a direct lie is. It's just simply, it's deliberate, it's premeditated, and you just ultimately lie about something. A great example in the scriptures, Jacob and Esau were brothers, and Jacob wanted to steal Esau's birthright. And so he came up with this big scheme, this big lie, and deceived his father in such a way that he was able to obtain that birthright. It was wrong. It was just a direct, outright lie. Another way, and maybe which we sort of break this commandment, is what we would call a subjective lie. This is the kind of lie where you arrange the facts in such a way that you're not directly lying. You know, it's sort of like, well, I'm really not lying here. But what you do is you allow others to believe that which is not true. Again, we can go back to the scriptures and we can see a couple examples of that. Someone like Joseph's brothers. They actually kidnapped Joseph and they put him into a well. And they didn't know what to tell their dad, so they took his coat of many colors and they put goat's blood on it and they brought it back to their dad. And they didn't directly lie to their dad and say, Dad, Joseph was killed by this wild beast, but by giving him the robe with the blood, his dad assumed that he had been killed by an animal or something, and he was dead. And they never told him the ultimate truth and what had happened. So that would be sort of that subjective lie. Judas, when he walked up to Jesus on the night that Judas betrayed him, and he gave him a kiss on the cheek, and it was sort of like, my friend. It was like, that was just a subjective lie, because the reality was he wasn't truly looking at him as a friend. He was kissing him so that he would be arrested, because he sold him for 30 pieces of silver. And then we have maybe the kind of lie which we would think maybe isn't necessarily a lie, but it's maybe when we know the truth, but we don't say anything about it. You know, you know someone that did something, and you see them either getting away with it, or maybe they didn't do something and you didn't speak up and they got punished for it. And it's because of our silence that we're not speaking the truth. We're not revealing what the truth ultimately would be. In Leviticus 5:1, it says that the person that remains silent will be held responsible for his silence. So keeping silent is a crime ultimately that God doesn't overlook. Another way in which we maybe can look at this commandment and see the sin in the words that we speak is slander. And a lot of times in slander, what happens, there's false accusations made against another person. I mentioned this young man, false accusation made against him. In the scriptures again, Joseph was falsely accused of wanting to sleep or raping Potiphar's wife, and Potiphar's wife, brought slander upon Joseph by saying, this is what he tried to do to me. The reality of it is it wasn't the truth. Flattery. Maybe it's another way in which we lie. And I hate to say this, but probably this is one that we all at some point or another can be very guilty with, when someone comes up and says, how does my hair look today? And inside it's like, it looks terrible. But we're like, oh, it really looks nice today. You're looking good. And it's like, yeah, you're sort of lying under your teeth, because that's really not the truth. Maybe you're saying it because you don't want to hurt them, but how often do we use flattery? Or we use flattery for alternative reasons. Students, maybe you do that with the teacher. I don't like that teacher, but you know what? I'm going to brown nose them, let them know how good they are, and the fact that, I really like your class, when ultimately you don't, because you just think it's going to help with your grade or whatever it might be. And again, that's just sort of that sin of deception and lying that God doesn't like. And then there's careless exaggeration. And how often maybe do we do something like that, where we speak the truth, but we're not telling them the complete truth. A great example might be with a business, where how long will it take for you to be able to get that done? And they say, well, it's only going to be about an hour. And yet the reality of it is they know it's going to be all day. Where a promise is made, but the promise isn't made with the complete truth behind it. So we have that exaggeration that comes. And then the last one I have here is lying to God. Where we directly are just lying to God. And a lot of times that might come when we make promises to God somehow or some way. Maybe we're in a very tough situation. We're desperate. And we cry out to God, oh God, please help me with this situation. And I promise, if you get me out of this situation, man, I'm going to tell people about you. I'm going to be in church every week. And we make this commitment to God that we ultimately aren't going to fulfill. And God doesn't like it. God doesn't like it when we lie to him in that manner. In fact, again, if you go into the scriptures, there's a story of a couple by the name of Ananias and Sapphira in Acts chapter 5. And they pretended to give all the money that they had got from selling some land back to the church. And when they were asked, did you give that money back to God? They were like, oh yeah, we gave it all back to God. And the reality of it was they had kept some back. And when God found out, the result was that they were struck dead in the presence of the entire congregation. And you think, boy, that was pretty harsh on God's, from God's standpoint. But God was really trying to emphasize, and God was really trying to bring forth just this mindset of how important truth should be within each one of our lives. When you think about it, what does lying do in the world that is around us? It destroys society, it wrecks homes, it splits churches, it fractures families, it poisons human relationships, it sort of calluses our minds and our consciences to the point maybe we don't even realize we're lying anymore. It condemns the soul. The reality of it is when we seek truth, when we seek to speak the truth, we know that leads to heaven. And we're reminded that God is truth. And if we lie and we live a life of lies, we know the sort of end point on that is it leads to hell. And we know that Satan is the father of all lies. And that's what he wants to see within each one of our lives. So when we think about what God is looking for as we speak, as we talk, God wants maybe these three things. He wants truthfulness in our words. He wants honesty in our relationships. And he wants integrity in our lifestyle. I mean, think about those three words: truthfulness, honesty, and integrity. How often is it easier to write those words down than at times for us to really live them out? When you think about truthfulness, it means an end to maybe the words that come out of our mouths that shouldn't come out of our mouths. It's an end to those lies that creep in as we're in conversation with someone. That we need to always be reminding ourselves, I need to make sure I'm sticking to the truth and I'm speaking the truth because God has called me to that. You think about honesty. And how often do we maybe want to play games with people around us by the words that we speak? And God's calling us to be honest and to quit implying that things are true when in reality they're not. And integrity, when we look at that word, it means that we're living a life that is open for all to see. And as they see how we live our lives, we're staying as close as we possibly can to walk in the pathway God has called us to walk. And if you put those words together, if you think about that truthfulness and that honesty and that integrity, really what happens, it becomes transparent living. In other words, as we live our lives, people can really see us for who we are. Whether it's the ugliness, sometimes that's a part of our lives, or the good. We're going to speak the truth in the ugliness. If we're struggling, if we're battling, if we're hurting, and someone says, how are you? We're not going to lie and say, oh, I'm fine. We're maybe going to speak the truth, but in a way in which they see the sincere heart we have to want to follow this commandment. It's easy to lie. And the problem with it is that's usually where it doesn't end. One lie can very easily lead to a next. And in the process, what happens is it becomes a habit, and the reality of it is ultimately your lies are going to be found out. How you speak is ultimately going to come sort of out into the open. We had a foster daughter that lived with us for 3 years, and she could lie through her teeth, and there were times when I would have swore she was telling the truth. But the reality of it was she grew up with this mindset of lying was the answer to the solutions that or problems she was dealing with, and it became such a habit for her that I think there was a point where she didn't even realize and recognize whether she was lying or not. But the truth comes out. I would always, as a youth pastor for years, I would have conversations with kids, and I'd say, "Don't lie to me, because eventually I'm going to find out." And they were like, "Well, and I'd just say, "You don't need to ask questions. I'll find out." And the thing of it is if we tend to make lying a part of our lives, eventually, as we get caught, we look pretty stupid. When I was just out of high school, I was just into college, I was working for a farmer, and I was driving down the road with a tractor one of the days, and I went to make a left-hand turn. Little did I know behind me was a tanker milk truck hauling milk, and the driver wasn't paying attention. Didn't realize I was going to turn to make a left-hand turn, and just as I turned, he was going to pass me, and he broadsided me with this milk truck. Unfortunately, neither one of us was hurt, but about a month later, I got a letter from the state of Iowa saying you need to appear as a witness in court. And here he was trying to appeal the ticket he got for the accident that took place. And of course, being young, 18, 19 years old, I just will never forget sitting on the stand and them asking me questions. And of course, I'm speaking the truth as best I can in all of it. And then I remember him coming up to become a witness, and the state started asking him questions. And as he told one lie after another, he started to dig a deeper and deeper hole for himself. And I just remember leaving that courthouse on that day, and of course, he didn't get out of his speeding ticket. He was guilty, or speeding and not all the tickets he got. He was guilty of them. And I just remember thinking, when he started lying, he got himself in the deeper, how fast were you going? Well, I was going 45 miles an hour. What was the speed limit for you? 45 miles an hour. Well, how fast do you think you were when you hit him? Well, probably 35 miles an hour. Well, if you were going 45 and you hit him at 35 and there's 200 feet of brake marks, don't you think you would have been going slower than that? Well, maybe I was going a little faster than that, And it was just one of those things where, lying didn't do him any good. And when we think about lying as a part of our lives, the problem is we talked about that being a habit. And there's this saying that says, you sow an act, you reap a habit. So in other words, if I think lying is okay, if I'm going to lie, it's going to become a habit. And it says you reap a habit, or you sow a habit, you reap a character. Now that starts to determine who you are. And you reap a character, or you sow a character, and you reap a destiny. That's how ultimately people are going to see you. And so we need to think about what we're saying and how we speak. Are we bearing false witness against our neighbor? Are we lying in ways in which we think it's no big deal, and yet the reality of it is it's hurting us? And the thing of it is God's calling us to speak the truth. He's calling us to speak in such a way that's going to be better for us and better for the people that are around us. And sometimes it's hard. And I remember as a little kid at times when I lied to my mom and dad. And as I lied to my dad, in my mind I was thinking, I hope they don't find out, because if they don't find out, I'm not going to get into trouble. But the reality of it was what I discovered was if they caught me lying, the punishment was even worse. And so sometimes telling the truth is painful, all right? Sometimes it's scary. And sometimes we recognize it's not the easy thing to do. But the reality of it is if we're willing to speak the truth, ultimately we're going to see blessing that comes from it. We don't have to endure the pain of maybe holding back, knowing that we've got this secret. I lied to so-and-so, and I hope they don't ever find out, because if they do, I just can't imagine what it's going to be like. When we're willing to speak the truth, then we will find that blessing. In John 8:32, Jesus said this. He says, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Jesus, as he came into this world, was the truth. And he reminded us that when we walk in that relationship with him, when we walk in truth, then that's when we experience freedom. Now, it might hurt for us to speak the truth. But as we speak the truth, ultimately we will experience freedom. And I was reminded of Jesus. Jesus endured so much. And yet one of the things that Jesus continued to speak all the time was he was the truth. He was about the truth and the importance of that truth within our lives. And so when we think about this commandment, we think about how can I become better at speaking the truth, there's maybe 3 ways in which I would challenge you today. The first one I would label as practice creative silence. Let me read some verses that the scriptures tell us. It's maybe a little bit of think before you speak, type of thing, or remain silent before you speak, or listen before you speak. In Proverbs 10:19, it says this: sin is not ended by multiplying words, but the prudent hold their tongues. And then we have Proverbs 11:12. Whoever derides their neighbor has no sense, but the one who has understanding holds their tongue. And then we have Proverbs 13:3. Those who guard their lips preserve their lives, but those who speak rashly will come to ruin. And then we have Proverbs 21:23, which says, those who guard their mouths and their tongues keep themselves from calamity. So truth-telling ultimately begins with silence. It's speak less, and if you speak less, you're going to speak more truthfully. A lot of times as we start a conversation, the more we start to talk, the more we can start to exaggerate what that truth ultimately is. Last week I had an experience where I was with someone and they got talking to a group of other people and they started sharing a story, and as they were sharing the story, of course, the more they got talking, the more the story got exaggerated. And I really knew what the truth was. I've come to realize now, after I sort of worked on this sermon this week, that I probably should have said something to them about, you really sort of deceived them a little bit in what you said there. But and so I've recognized that even in my silence, I wasn't maybe right in what I did. But, it was that mindset of they got talking, and it was easy just to start to exaggerate from there. And I want to encourage you to sort of take a step back and listen. And sometimes before we speak, we maybe even need to lift up that short little quick prayer. God, give me wisdom in what I speak. God, make sure that you're guiding me with the words that come out of my mouth. Allow me understanding so that I might speak the truth. And may your love be manifested in the words that I speak. That as we speak, we know what we're speaking has come from God. We know it's going to be the truth, and it's going to glorify Him. It's going to build up maybe the people that are around us. The second thing that I think we can do to help us with the words that come out of our mouth is practice personal accountability. And how often do we talk about the beauty of our brothers and sisters in Christ? That we recognize we have each other that we can turn to. If I have a problem gossiping, I should be taking advantage of the fact that I have relationships around me that I can say, hey, I have this issue. Sometimes I talk about people in the way that I shouldn't, and I don't like it, but I catch myself doing it. Can you help me with that? Can you pray for me about that? If we're together and you hear me start to come into a conversation like that, give me a look somehow or some way, or let's have a code word, whatever it might be, so I can catch myself so that I don't continue to fall into that sin. The beauty of God giving us these relationships is so that we can grow together, so we can hold each other accountable, so that we're able to be able to work through these commandments in such a way that blessing comes from it. And it's easier ultimately to be able to share with them maybe the things that are upon our heart, those lies maybe that we're holding back from wanting to expose. They can be the encouraged to say, you got to go talk to that person. You need to tell them the truth, because if you don't, ultimately, it's maybe going to be far much worse than what it is already. The third way I would challenge you is just really simply to commit yourself to becoming a person of truth. I think one of the things we forget is there's a lot of things that we can't control, but we can control the words that we speak. It's that aspect of developing a habit of speaking the truth. Again, if we go back to Jesus in John 14:6 said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So if we start to focus our eyes on Jesus, and we challenge ourselves to grow in that relationship with Him, then we will become people of truth. He's going to abide in us. And He's sort of, as He abides within us, is going to start to control what we speak and what we say and how it's lived out. In John 18:37, Jesus is standing before Pilate, and Jesus declares this. He said, for this reason I was born, Let me read it from there. "You are a king then?" said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And so we keep our eyes focused on him. And when we focus on Jesus, then we know what the truth is compared to what's being thrown at us in the world that is around us. Because we are living in a world today where we don't know what the truth is. And so we need a measuring stick to be able to determine that. You know, if there's a crooked stick and someone says that stick is straight, there's no way to know if the reality of what they're saying is the truth or not until you put a straight stick next to it. And when you put that straight stick next to it, then it's like, oh yeah, now I can see that one's crooked. Whether we hear what we do on the media or maybe with the people that are around us, how do we know what is the truth? Well, let's put it alongside of Jesus being the truth. I had a young lady that messaged me this week, one of my former students that is now a school teacher, and one of her students graduated in the last year or two, and she's off at college wanting to become a science teacher, and one of the classes that she is now taking right now is macroevolution. In other words, the mindset, you know, that we evolved from apes to become the human beings that we are. And she wrote the student of mine and said, "I'm struggling in this class right now because as I hear them talking about evolution, I'm starting to believe that that's what the truth is." And she grew up in the church, and she knew that, you know, that in the church it was, well, God's the creator, you know, but she said, "I'm starting to believe it." And so she had written me, and she says, "What would you say to her? How would you help her?" And one of the things that I said is compare it to what other people are saying in regards to God being the creator. If we only look at one side, it's going to be easy for us to fall away from what the truth is. But if we put it up against a measuring stick, all right, what does the scriptures tell us about how God created the heavens and the earth? What scientists are out there that believe in the creation and what God has done? And look at the evidence that they have. And I think if you put it side by side, you're going to discover that this evolution thing that they're telling you about is really not truth. You know, they can teach it as a theory. If they're teaching it as fact, then they're being wrong. And so the challenge for us is to be focused on the truth of who Jesus Christ is and use him as that measuring stick. In John 1:14, we read that Jesus came to the earth. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and the only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And so when we walk in that relationship with Jesus Christ, then we know the truth. When we follow Jesus, then what are we doing? We're following the truth. When we believe in Jesus, we're believing in the truth. And that's why truth-telling is very crucial within our lives. That's why this commandment of thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt really not lie, is so important to us. And I'm reminded of when Pilate was holding trial for Jesus. And as he was holding trial, Pilate asked the question, what is truth? He asked the question, what is truth? And of course, that's a question all throughout the centuries that continues to echo. People will say, what is the truth? What is the truth? And of course, for him, it was sort of a philosophical proposition. He was looking at it in the wrong way. And the reality of it was the truth was standing right in front of him, and he didn't even recognize it. And so when we think about this commandment, I challenge and encourage you to recognize that Jesus Christ is the truth. And he's standing there in front of us. And if we recognize him, he will give guidance to the words that we speak, the things that we say. He will allow us to speak in such a way that the truth will set us free. What a difference that would make in our world if we would just very simply be willing to speak the truth. And as God's people, if we're willing to speak that truth, we can start to make that difference in a way in which will make just a great impact on the lives of the people that are around us. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your word on this day. Lord, I pray that you will challenge us with this commandment. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Lord, we think about our neighbors, all those that are around us. It might be our brother, our sister. It might be our family. It might be the person that literally lives next door to us. It might be someone that we don't even know. Help us to be very mindful of the words that we speak. Even in this past week, Lord, as I've had to think about this message, it's really made me aware of my own words and what I speak. There are times when maybe I am not as truthful as I should be, that I think, what's this going to hurt? And so I personally come before you this morning, Lord, seeking for forgiveness for the lies that maybe have come out of my mouth. And Lord, I pray that you will challenge each person here in this week to really think about the words that they are speaking. And that for each of us, we would become bolder in saying, I need to speak the truth when the truth needs to be spoken. I need to speak up about the truth when it needs to be spoken up about. I need to make people accountable to the truth because you have called me to be accountable to the truth. And Lord, may we seek you. May we be reminded that as we walk in our relationship with Jesus Christ, it is that truth that will set us free. And we ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Let's finish our time of worship as together we sing our last song. And as we do so, the deacons will take the offering. And please stand to sing.
We're turning over every stone, hoping to find salvation in a world that's left us cold. Can we get back to the altar, back to the arms of our first love? There's only one way to the Father, and he's calling out to us. To the captive it looks like freedom, to the orphan it feels like home. To the skeptic it might sound crazy to believe in a God who loves. In a world where our hearts are breaking and we're lost in the mess we've made, like a blinding light in the dead of night, it's the gospel that makes a way. It's the good news for us all. It's greater than religion. It's the power of the cross. So can we get back to the altar, back to the arms of our first love? There's only one way to the Father, and he's calling out to us. To the captive it looks like freedom, to the orphan it feels like home. To the skeptic it might sound crazy to believe in a God who loves. In a world where our hearts are breaking and we're lost in the mess we've made, like a blinding light in the dead of night, it's the gospel that makes a way. It's the gospel that makes a way. It's the gospel that makes a way.
The amazing news of the gospel is not that we can receive Jesus into our lives, but that he's already received us into his.
In my own life it means forgiveness when I know I deserve the fall. It called me out of my darkness and carried me to the cross. In a moment my eyes were open. In that moment my heart was changed. Like a blinding light in the dead of night. It's the gospel. Oh, to the captive it looks like freedom. To the orphan it feels like home. Yeah, to the skeptic it might sound crazy to believe in a God who loves. In a world where our hearts are breaking and we're lost in the mess we made. Like a blinding light in the dead of night. It's the gospel that makes a way. 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 It's the gospel that makes a way.
You know, as you go on this day, I'm just reminded of the scripture where it says, no greater love does a man have than this, when he's willing to lay down his life for his friend. And then it goes on, and Jesus Christ says, you are my friend. We recognize that Jesus Christ has laid down his lives for us. So as you leave today, may you grab hold of that love as he laid down his life for you, and go out into the world and recognize and share that gospel with the people that are around you. As you go on this day, experience his peace. Amen.
Through every battle, through every heartbreak, through every circumstance, I believe that you are my fortress.